Welcome friends. We are continuing with the lecture on experiments, right, basically the causal research design and the type of experimental designs. So, in the initial in the last lecture we talked about the pre-experimental, right, and then we talked about quasi-experimental, we talked about truly experimental designs, and now we are continuing with the statistical designs. Statistical designs are an improvement over the first three in the sense that it allows the researchers to make statistical controls, that means through a number of experiments, through a number of series of tests, it allows you to make some statistical controls. So, that is why it is one of the most popular designs used by researchers everywhere, right. So, what is the statistical design and what are the types, in which we discussed the first one we said was the randomized block design, right. The randomized block design we said where one variable was taken and was measured on basis of some kind of a treatment level. So, in our case if you remember, we had taken the experience of a driver and the effect of treatments like the advertisement, right. So, three levels of advertisement we had chosen where no humor and some humor, right, and all humor was taken, and then it was tried to check whether what is the effect of these advertisements on the experience of the drivers, right, basically. So, the experience of the drivers and what kind of impact was it making, basically these kind of advertisements when you take different levels of experience of the drivers. The second case we talked about was an improvement over the first one, the Latin square. So, the Latin square design said that you try to make a test or a experiment on basis of taking two non-interacting variables. So, we are taking two variables here we had only in the randomized we are taken only one variable, here we are allowing for two variables, but not more than two, right. So, that is a good thing as well as a bad thing also. So, you cannot take more than two. One more problem with the Latin square design was that the number of rows and columns and treatments had to be same, right. So, in the randomized, but that was allowing you for a different kind of combinations, for example, a 3x4 matrix, let us say 3 experience levels and 4 let us say was let us say the humor kind of advertisement levels, or it could be 2 into 3 whatever, or 3 into 2 whatever, right. But in this case it has to be a 3x3 or a 4x4 whatever, in this kind it has to go. So, the Latin square design had some improvement over the randomized block design by taking two variables at one time, but then the problem was that it did not allow for interaction and it did not allow you a free hand to make a different combinations of matrix. So, now we will come to the third, which is called the factorial design, and the factorial design is the one which is used mostly in all kind of research studies where the researcher wants to see the effect of an interaction. So, what is an interaction basically? Interaction means, understand, there is some effect which is a main effect or a direct effect, main effect for example, right. What is the main effect? The effect of one variable of an independent variable on the dependent variable. But then what is the interaction effect in that case? The interaction effect says that whenever there is a presence of another variable and due to the presence or absence of that variable, another variable, whatever change in the dependent variables value comes is due to an interaction among the independent variables, right. So, this is what it says. Suppose A is an independent variable which has an effect on the dependent variable, and then you bring in another variable B. Generally I tell it in my class, suppose for example, just imagine there is one person in the class sitting, right, a group of boys sitting, and suddenly they are attending the class very patiently, they are listening, they are participating. Suddenly another group of girls come to the class, because of a gender, because boys and girls come together, they start feeling better and they start talking to each other. So, now there is an interaction effect. So, had these girls not been there, the boys would have been silent and they would have maybe participated. Had only girls been there, boys would not have been there, again they would have participated in the class. But now since the girls and boys together they are sitting, they are talking to themselves and they are listening to the class less. So, this is just an example, please understand. So, what it says is experimental design used to measure the effect of two or more variables, independent variables at various levels and to allow for interactions. So, it allows you to study more than two variables even, and at various levels, for example, in the humor case, no humor, some humor, all humor. It also allows you for interaction. So, this is the best kind of design that you can think of, right. Unlike the randomized block design and the Latin square, factorial designs allow for interactions between the variables, and this is the truth in life, right. Many a times we feel A affects B, but actually the effect of A does not remain the same when another variable C or D or E comes into the picture. It is like a chemical reaction where you just imagine the presence of another, or the the kind of weather, let us say, or the presence or absence of a chemical or some element will change the entire reaction. So, this thing happens in real life also, in real life most of the time. So, interaction variables effects should be studied, they are very important. An interaction is said to take place when the simultaneous effect of two variables is different from the sum of their separate sheets effects. That means, effect of A, effect of B individually is A plus B is not equal to the effect of A, B together, right. So, now take this example. An individual's favorite drink might be coffee, he likes coffee, and favorite temperature level might be cold. So, he loves coffee, he likes cold things, but same individual will not prefer cold coffee because it leads this is what is an interaction effect. So, you may love coffee, you may love the cold things, but you do not love an cold coffee, right. A factorial design may be conceptualized as a table, okay, as a table. I will show you. In a two factor design, each level of one variable represents a row and each level of another variable represents a column. So, we will see in the table when I will go to the next slide. Multidimensional tables can be used for 3 or more factors. Factorial designs involve a cell for every possible combination of treatment variables. So, let us see what about another factor. Let us say now this is a case, this is simple to understand, I have brought it. A exam is being taken, the level of difficulty of the exam is hard and easy. Now, the effect of, forget it for a second, now we are trying to study the effect of the level of difficulty of the test on the score the student is getting, right. Now, what we are doing is we are trying to bring in another variable, the room temperature in which the student is appearing the exam. The student is appearing in a temperature, let us say level is, this is in 15-90 degrees, is very high, right. We will not take it so high, it is just an example. Let us assume this is 30 degrees and this is, let us say, 40 degrees, and let us say there is no air conditioner in the room, right. So, a hard test in 30 degrees, hard test in 40 degrees, hard test in easy test in 30 degrees, easy test in 40 degrees. So, when I am taking this level, when I am taking, so will the score that the student will get be the same had he taken only a hard test at, let us say, and room temperature is not taken, or only taken the room temperature, then the level of test could have been anything. So, this will vary, right. Now, if I ask him to take a test, a hard test at a high degree, maybe his performance might be very poor or it could be even better, I do not know how, sometimes people react positively in a adverse condition. So, but generally speaking the result will be bad because he is sweating and at the same time the test is also very hard, okay. So, these kind of studies help you to find an interaction effect, okay. Now, example, in addition to examining the effect of humor in that last case which we have discussed, the researcher was also interested in simultaneously examining the effect of the amount of information about the performance of the vehicle Renault Laguna that came over in the advertisement. So, what had he taken in the last case? We had taken the effect of the experience and the amount of information. Further, amount of information was varied at 3 levels, right. So, let us look at this. So, the amount of information, right, amount of humor, right. So, the information is let us say low, medium and high. Low information about the vehicle, medium. So, this is the experience you can say. The humor has been taken as no humor, some humor, high humor, and now the each test unit is placed, right. So, what happens here is, now if you see, the respondents would be randomly selected and randomly assigned to the 9 cells. So, 9 cells 1, 2, 3, 3. So, 3 cross 3 9. So, randomly they are assigned. Respondents in each cell would receive a specific treatment combination and then the results would be measured, right. So, you can take maybe this is one, or you can take even more number of cases. For example, you may take let us say for this case, for example, now let us say hard test 30 degrees, hard test 40 degrees, easy test 30 degrees, easy test 40 degrees, and this we can also put in some kind of some treatment also within this. So, when you do this kind of a combination of test, then we say it is a case of a factorial design, right. Okay. Now, coming to once we have we are over. So, you understood the factorial design. Factorial design allows you for an interaction effect, that is the basic advantage. Okay. And it has no conditions like you in the Latin square design, that it has to be a 3 cross 3, 3 cross 4, it can be of any size. Now, coming to laboratory versus field experiments. So, what is this? So, we have understood experiments may be conducted in both. Psychological experiments are conducted on the field, laboratory physical experiments. So, field environment and experimental condition in set in actual market conditions, right, and laboratory is an artificial setting for experimental in which the researcher constructs the desired conditions. So, in a lab it is a simulated condition where the real kind of a real situation is being created, but it is not exactly the real condition, and this is the real one. So, if you look at the difference between the two in terms of environment, it is laboratory is artificial, this is realistic. Control, you have a high control in the laboratory, in the field you do not have any control. Internal validity means the independent variables are actually affecting the dependent variable is high in the laboratory, and in the field you may not be able to have, because there is no control. External validity is low, because what you do in the lab might not happen true in the general public or in the population, but here this is what happens. If something is inferred, that would be true, because it is in a very uncontrolled place, and if this result comes true, that means it might be possible for the entire population. Time, this is short and it takes a long time, right. Units, small, large, right, the large population you have to test it, because you do not know to make it more reliable, the study to make it more reliable, you may have to extend the test and on the number of samples. Implementation is high, ease of implementation is high, and this is low, because obviously it is tricky to work in a real time in a field. The cost is low here and high. So, these are some of the basic differences. Okay. So, the laboratory experiment environment offers a high degree of control, because it isolates the experiment in a carefully monitored environment, right. Therefore, the effect of history can be minimized. You remember history? History is, for example, what was happening in the environment at the same time. So, we get an example, for example, you want to know the impact on income of a person, and the economy is going down at the same time. So, that is an effect of history. Okay. So, laboratory experiment also tends to produce the same results if repeated with similar subjects, leading to high internal validity. If you repeat it, then it will give you a high internal validity. Laboratory experiments tend to use a small number of test units, last for a short time, be more restricted geographically, and are easier to conduct than field experiments. I have explained that. Hence, they are generally less expensive. So, an example, an experiment investigated the effect of prison on the behavior of the prisoners and the guards by creating a simulated prison and randomly allocated 21 volunteers. Now, that is true, but that is not a real prison, right. So, and these volunteers were divided into either prisoners or guard. So, when you if the experiment found that the guards eventually became aggressive. So, as a result the prisoners became submissive. So, this is an example of a laboratory. You are trying to create a simulated environment in a lab condition, field condition. You wanted to measure the effectiveness of different teaching methods on educational performance in a school. So, it is a real life situation. All you would need to do is to get teachers to administer a short test to measure current performance levels and then get them to change one aspect of their teaching for one class or for a sample of some pupils or students, but not for the others. That means, the treatment is given at different levels, okay, for a period of time, and then measured and compared the results of all the students at the end. So, this is a field experiments where you are able to control the experiment and run the experiment better in a more random manner. So, that randomization thing is possible, which allows you to create a high external validity of the research. Okay. That means, whatever answer we will get from this research can be said to be universally acceptable or true. Okay. Limitations: experiments can be time consuming, particularly if the researcher is interested in measuring the long term effects. If you want to measure a long term effect, it is time consuming. They are often expensive, right, and they can be difficult to administer also. Okay. Competitors may deliberately contaminate the results of a field experiment. Just some of the limitations. Okay. Now, coming to something called a test market. Now, test marketing, when we are talking about this course called marketing research, so we need to understand this term test marketing very well. So, what is this test marketing? Test marketing is an application of a controlled experiment done in limited but carefully selected parts of the marketplace called test markets. For example, a company wants to test a new product, right. It wants to launch a new product and it wants to test whether this new product will do well in the market or not. In such a condition, it goes for a test market. So, it does a controlled experiment in some limited place, in some place which is actually a true sample or a representative of the entire population that they are interested in, of the target segments. So, this process is called test marketing. So, there are various conditions in the test market. First of all, we say what is a standard test market? Test markets are selected. That means, you select out of the many test markets. That means what? A test market is one which has got a very much resemblance or similarity to the target segment that you are interested in, right. So, test markets are selected and the product is sold through regular distribution channels. So, it is more or less like a real time situation. Control test markets, on the other hand, is conducted by outside research companies for another company who handles warehousing, sales, stocking and selling, etc. But remember, this is not done by the company itself, it is conducted by somebody, some outside agency, right. Simulated test markets are third condition, which is actually, in fact, if you see the first condition while going for a test marketing process, also called as laboratory test or test market simulation. It yields mathematical estimates of market share or demand based on initial reaction of consumers to a new. How do consumers react? From that reaction, we try to assume how much will be the sales or the future demand of this product. So, this is what we talk about in the test market. So, let us see this. So, how it looks like? First, a new product development or research on existing products is going on, right. So, the first stage is you create a simulated test market. So, what is the simulated test market? We just said it is a laboratory or a test market simulation, where you try to mathematically see how the consumers are reacting, and as per the reaction what should be the future sales or the demand. Okay. Then the next step is a controlled. So, after the simulation you test market, you go for a controlled test market, where you ask some hire some agency and ask them to test how actually the after the, suppose we launch the product or we launch the product in the market, then how would it be, how will the consumers react to it, how would the market react to it. The third is the next step, which is a standard test marketing, where the company is trying to see for itself how it actually would run, how it actually would behave had it been gone through a process which is a very close to the original or the actual or the true process. That means, if I actually launch it and then try to distribute extensively in the entire distribution channel and promote it and all, how would it be? A very closer situation is the standard test market, right. So, here you are, the company is trying to do everything, but in a limited space. And then finally, after this what you do is you do a national introduction, that means you launch the product simply, right. How do you select a test market? the question is, how does a marketer select the test market? Test market should have the following qualities, right. The first, it should be large enough to produce meaningful projections. They should contain at least 2% of the potential actual population. Suppose I want to, this is my entire market, right. Now, if I do my, I cannot launch it obviously. So, I take a small sample. So, this sample is actually having a homogeneous population which is similar to the entire population that I am interested in. Okay. So, I take this. So, what it says is, if I select this sample should at least have 2% of the total actual population, right. It should be representative demographically. So, it should be homogeneous or it should be representative, it should be very close to my interest, the segment of my interest. It should be representative with respect to product consumption behavior. There should be consumption behavior should also be more or less the same. With respect to the media usage also they should be similar. With respect to competition also that means it should not be like that you choose a test market where there is no competition or the competitors are not available at that place, and you feel and you do it and you feel that is the true result, because the true result would be different, because if with the presence of the competitors. So, if more competitors are available at the place and you are in your test market it is not available, then that will give a wrong figure. Be relatively isolated in terms of media and physical distribution. So, it should be isolated because you do not want to actually show it to the others, right, the competitors and others, and have normal historical development in the product class. So, the product class, that means the type of product, the range of products, it should be more or less in a normal condition, that is as in a reality situation, is a real life situation. Okay. Last, have marketing research and auditing services available. It should, this place which I am testing as a test market, they should have all the facilities of a research for conducting a research and auditing the services that I am going to give it to the consumers and my retailer and the entire distribution channel. Okay. So, this is all we have. So, today in this lecture I explained about what is basically the statistical control design, and in which we talked about the various the three types of basically statistical designs: the randomized design, the Latin square design and the factorial design. The factorial design is always an improvement over the first two, because the factorial design allows you to take more than one independent variable or more than two independent variables, and then it also allows you for an interaction effect, right. So, which is not present during the Latin square design, and obviously random, so it is not possible because there was only one independent variable. So, Latin square design had two variables, but then interaction effect was not able to, we were not able to conduct the check the interaction effect, right. And the more the important thing is that it also allowed for a different combination of matrix, that means the treatment levels given could be at a different levels. So, after this we have learned that factorial design is widely used, for example, your ANOVA, analysis of variance and such techniques, they use a factorial, this is a factorial design, a case of factorial design, right. So, the researcher uses this factorial design to statistically come to some conclusion, and finally we said what is exactly, how does the experimentation happen in the field in a case of a marketing, for a marketing company or a marketing case. In that we realized that a company needs to create a laboratory like situation, or the company does a field experiment, right, in which it creates a test market. A test market is a small market which is a representative of the market to which the company is interested to sell its product, and then test whether this product will be acceptable to the consumers or not in the right spirit. To do that, they have to take into account many features. For example, the demographic variable should be more or less the same, the conditions should be more or less the same, the number of competitors available should be more or less the same. So, all these conditions should be more or less like the target segment for which the company is interested. Once they do it, then what they do is they try to do some control test, standard tests and all, and try to see whether how the market would actually react to when they would launch the product, right. So, this is all about experimentation we have done and we have understood. I hope this lecture is useful to you, and you have understood by what it means by experimentation and causal research. So, because it all started with causal research, in which experimentation is one of the most important things, and then we understood that with causal research, it is not only causal research can be done in the lab with only raw materials and non living entities, but also you can do it on the field, in the field with real people, right, and understand the psychological behavior and the impact of certain independent variables on dependent variables such as market share, sales, the acceptance of a product, the rejection of a product, etc., right. I think I have tried to make justice to this lecture. I hope it is clear. In case you have doubts, you are free to ask me questions, and I will try to answer you as much as possible. Thank you so much.